Welcome to our discussion on the empty homes tax and community civic engagement, working with policymakers at City Hall to defend our right to housing. As we get started, I want to give a moment for our interpreters, Marcia Valdivieso and Andrea Valencia, to offer instructions for interpretation.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm going to give these instructions in both English and Spanish, so just bear with me. Hola, buenas noches a todas y todos, ¿cómo están? Soy Andrea y estoy con mi cointérprete Marcy el día de hoy. Como es costumbre, vamos a tener interpretación simultánea al español y al inglés para que puedan expresarse en el idioma que mejor prefieren. Para esto ya tienen correctamente un receptor y audífonos en estos audífonos, en este mismo canal, que es el canal 3. No tienen que hacer nada, ya está puesto así. Vamos a interpretar al inglés y al español. Entonces les pedimos que si escuchan inglés pueden bajarse los audífonos y cuando quieran escuchar se los ponen. Si tienen algún problema con los audífonos pueden levantar la mano y una de nosotras vendrá a ayudarles, y siéntanse libres de participar en español porque vamos a estarlo interpretando. And so for all of those of you who speak English, we will have simultaneous interpretation to facilitate communication between those who wish to speak in Spanish or in English. And so for this, I'm here with my co-interpreter Marcy, and we will be doing simultaneous interpretation into English and Spanish. You should have a receiver on you. It should be set on channel number 3. You don't have to do anything about it. It's just on 3. And we both interpret into the same channel for English and Spanish. So we ask for you to either put it on or off, depending on the language that you want to hear, and participate in the language you feel the most comfortable. And for those of you who are bilingual, we ask that you just stay in one language when you're participating or speaking, so that we don't have our brain jumbled up. And also, please just take turns when speaking. Give 1 second or 2 seconds before you begin speaking, so you can give us a little bit of time to catch up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Okay, so this evening is about the empty homes tax, housing for people or for profits. And what's unique to San Francisco is that we have many communities that are active, that are reaching out to other members of the community and understanding what our needs are as people who live in San Francisco. And that information is really important. And from that, we can address our housing crisis. In San Francisco, over the past 10 years, there have been an increasing number of market rate housing that's been developed in the South of Market, in the downtown area, in the Mission District. And we've seen thousands of units that have been developed. And yet, at the same time, we're seeing thousands of units in these same neighborhoods that remain vacant. All while we have many, many San Franciscans who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity and are seeking relief. So today is really about how community groups, Faith in Action Bay Area, will be speaking on behalf of one of the communities affected, and the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, have teamed together to craft a ballot measure, and we'll be hearing about their process. We also would not be able to do our work in the community if we did not have a place for our voices to land and be heard. And we also have with us Supervisor Dean Preston, who will also be talking about his work on the Board of Supervisors, working with community groups like Faith in Action and the Democratic Socialists of America on bringing forward community-centered solutions. So, and we'll be joined shortly by Shanti Singh with the Democratic Socialists of America, and we're also joined by Fernando Martí with the Council of Community Housing Organizations to talk about the extent of vacancies, to define the problem from the housing side. So first, we want to be able to hear from the leaders of Faith in Action. Faith in Action has been a main proponent, and it's really unique and exciting how they've come to work on this measure from the community side. So our first speaker will join us today, right now. Welcome.
Mi nombre es Sonel Barenga, soy líder con Fe en Acción, vivo en el distrito 11, asisto a la iglesia San Pedro. Fe en Acción, área de la Bahía, somos una red de más de 100 congregaciones y escuelas en los condados de San Francisco y San Mateo. Trabajamos juntos para desarrollar nuestro liderazgo y construimos poder a través de la línea de clase, raza, idioma y generaciones. Lo hacemos al crear relaciones con nuestra comunidad para poder tomar acción colectiva. De esta forma enfocamos y mejoramos constantemente la forma en que canalizamos el poder de actuar juntos y la forma que actuamos públicamente para cambiar los sistemas injustos. Nuestro trabajo colectivo está guiado por aquellos que se ven más afectados por la iniquidad, la injusticia, como las familias inmigrantes, los jóvenes, las personas mayores y personas de bajos ingresos. Hoy, como parte de este propósito, estamos aquí para hablar de cómo nació la motivación de impulsar este impuesto a las unidades vacantes dentro de nuestros valores de fe y moral. Este impuesto es una escala más en nuestra visión que nació hace más de 4 años con la búsqueda de subsidios para el edificio de Casa Adelante, que está situado en la 1296 Shawell, y de la visión de la comunidad de que todos los adultos mayores y familias de bajos ingresos paguen el 30% de sus ingresos en el pago de la renta. Las necesidades de subsidio que vayan a las personas y no a edificios es una urgencia, ya que sabemos que existe la vivienda accesible, pero aún así es inaccesible para mucha de nuestra comunidad, porque no logran los ingresos que se les pide y es una lotería. Necesitamos asegurar los hogares de nuestra gente. Esta visión fue más clara para nosotros después de la pandemia del COVID-19. Vino a resaltar lo que ya sabemos, que este sistema no trabaja igual para todos. Y la falta de vivienda realmente accesible sigue siendo el dolor local más fuerte para nuestra gente trabajadora de la comunidad. Nosotros en Fe en Acción utilizamos el método del círculo organizativo como guía para mantener nuestro enfoque en cada paso que damos, que es escuchar, investigar, acción y reflexión. Pero antes de iniciar, queremos decirles que también estamos aquí porque al ver de su historia de Chucho, conocimos las luchas por las que ustedes iniciaron en 1970. Hoy queremos reconocerles lo importante que han sido estas luchas y victorias para la comunidad, y al igual que ustedes, nuestros intereses y prioridad es la gente. Pero eso es muy importante, nunca olviden su historia de lucha y de dónde vienen, y la visión que nació de la voz y la experiencia de la realidad de la gente. Porque si ustedes iniciaron estas luchas fue porque vieron y escucharon el dolor de la comunidad. Nunca olviden, porque cuando esto se olvida, se pierde la esencia del propósito que los hizo luchar por la comunidad. Señor Ábalos, yo, en representación de los líderes de SPE en Acción, quiero invitarle a que vaya usted a nuestra oficina y comparta con todos los líderes comunitarios la historia de cómo y por qué nació Chucho. Gracias.
Gracias. ¿Hay otras personas que...?
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Oscar Martínez, soy líder de Fe en Acción y asisto a la Iglesia Misión Dolores. La primera parte del círculo organizativo es escuchar. A través de escuchar a cientos de adultos mayores que aplicaría a la construcción del nuevo edificio que sería solo para adultos mayores, nos dimos cuenta que los ingresos de ellos recibiría era de $400 hasta $1,200 al mes, por lo cual un impacto para nosotros, porque la renta sería de $1,250 hacia arriba. Era un edificio accesible, pero no entendíamos para quién. ¿Por qué? Para los adultos que estábamos escuchando no lo era. Es así como a través de esas conversaciones sagradas y profundas, nosotros decidimos enfrentar el ideal que la ciudad nos presentaba con la realidad que nuestra gente vivía. Empezamos a hacer foros comunitarios para escuchar a nuestras comunidades de adultos mayores. También durante la pandemia hicimos alcances en las líneas de comidas. Hablamos con muchísimas personas a través del banco de llamada. Aproximadamente hablamos con más de 5,000 personas que estaban viviendo las consecuencias del virus más grande, que era la indiferencia de ese sistema a la falta de empleo, la falta de trabajo, el contagio y pérdida de familiares. Y fue así como a través del diálogo decidimos por lo que queríamos luchar y que sería una visión colectiva hacia nuestros sueños. Y ahora pasamos al segundo paso.
Mi nombre es Daisy Camey, soy líder de Fe en Acción. Vivo en el Distrito 9 y asisto a la Iglesia San Antonio. La siguiente etapa del círculo organizativo es investigar. Nuestras investigaciones nos llevaron a darnos cuenta que existen más de 5,000 adultos mayores que pagamos más del 70% de nuestros ingresos en el pago de la renta. Que tenemos a casi 10,000 personas sin hogar, sin olvidar a cientos de familias y personas que viven en sus carros y en hoteles en muy malas condiciones. Tuvimos reuniones de investigación con diferentes supervisores para conocer su postura y el plan de trabajo para enfrentar estas realidades antes mencionadas. Nos dimos cuenta que existen 41,000 unidades vacantes en esta ciudad de San Francisco, lo cual se nos hace una inmoralidad, ya que estas unidades siguen subiendo de valor en el mercado. Desafortunadamente, la vivienda se ha convertido en un negocio, olvidando que es un derecho humano tener un hogar. Por eso, como vecinos de los diferentes distritos de esta ciudad, decidimos trabajar juntos para que se haga lo moralmente correcto. Siguiendo con nuestras investigaciones, descubrimos que este impuesto ya existe en Vancouver, Canadá, por lo cual tuvimos una reunión de investigación con la tesorera Marina Marcín y nos compartió los beneficios que esto trae si se trabaja para el beneficio de la gente y no para intereses de unos cuantos. Cuando nos enteramos que el supervisor de impuesto también estaba pensando en esta idea, fue una luz de esperanza para todos nosotros, los adultos mayores y familias de bajos ingresos. Fue un motivo más a seguir luchando por nuestro sueño y visión. Como personas de fe, no podíamos ser indiferentes a los beneficios que traerá a nuestra comunidad más vulnerable. Como líderes, seguimos investigando para tener más conocimiento y seguir preparándonos para seguir luchando colectivamente por nuestra visión que incluye la voz de la comunidad. Gracias.
Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Brenda Córdoba, soy líder y presidenta de la mesa directiva de Fe en Acción. Vivo en el distrito número 6 y me congrego en la iglesia San Pedro. La siguiente parte de nuestro círculo organizativo me tocó la acción. Una vez más quiero reiterar que todas las campañas, investigaciones, acciones y toda decisión es hecha por el Comité Central de los Líderes Comunitarios y no es una decisión del staff de Fe en Acción. Tuvimos diferentes acciones durante la lucha por los subsidios para la gente del edificio del 1296 Chawel, Casa Adelante, para que pudieran calificar y pagar su renta con el 30% de sus ingresos. Gracias a que los adultos mayores se organizaron para cambiar su situación y poder aspirar a vivienda que ellos pudieran pagar, teniendo una victoria de 41 unidades subsidiadas. Logramos grandes victorias durante la pandemia, como lograr 6 millones para recuperación del COVID-19. Otra victoria fue obtener ayuda para la renta, logrando 32 millones para nuestra gente. Y así hemos seguido luchando para nuestra gente. Hemos tenido acciones de investigación con supervisores y organizaciones para conocer su postura sobre este impuesto a las unidades vacantes. Seguiremos haciendo investigaciones hasta que la voz de nuestra comunidad sea escuchada para llegar a esa visión y sueño del 30% en el pago de la renta. Es muy fácil decidir por la gente cuando no se le escucha. Es muy difícil hacer lo moralmente correcto cuando le escuchas. Pero los intereses personales se interponen ante lo que es correcto. No podemos seguir permitiendo que nuestra gente siga siendo deportada de sus hogares. ¿Acaso no es esta una ciudad santuario? Luchemos para que nuestras familias, jóvenes, niños y adultos mayores se queden acá en San Francisco. Gracias.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es María Mijares, soy líder de Fe en Acción. Vivo en el Distrito 9 y asisto a la iglesia de San Pedro. Lo siguiente es la reflexión. Nuestras reflexiones las tenemos constantemente después de cada reunión de líderes, después de cada reunión de investigación, después de cada acción. Para nosotros es muy importante reconocer lo que funcionó, lo que podemos mejorar, lo que podemos cambiar, cuando es necesario parar y cuando tenemos que presionar, etc. Pero lo más importante de nuestras reflexiones y todo lo que se ha mencionado es que lo hacemos juntos en equipo. Y nosotros los líderes y personas que están más cerca del dolor, somos los que decidimos y guiamos nuestras luchas. En este proceso de reflexión también hablamos sobre cómo va creciendo nuestro liderazgo y de cómo podemos exhortar y crear conciencia de que si queremos ver un verdadero cambio en nuestras comunidades, tenemos que ser nosotros mismos los que estemos al frente, guiando para asegurarnos que la voz y la realidad de la gente que estamos en las situaciones de iniquidad sean no solo escuchadas, sino tengamos respuestas favorables que den una liberación colectiva, y necesitamos de todos ustedes aquí presentes para lograr esta visión, no solo para nosotros, sino para generaciones futuras. Gracias. Ahora les dejo con un testimonio.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Zoila Martínez, soy líder de Fe en Acción y pertenezco me congrego en la iglesia El Templo de la Fe, vivo en el Distrito 9. Estando en esta situación de la necesidad por encontrar un hogar económico, Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Zoila Martínez, soy líder de Fe en Acción y me congrego en el Templo de la Fe y vivo en el Distrito 9. Estando en esta situación de necesidad por encontrar un lugar económico donde vivir, llegué a Fe en Acción para que me ayudaran a aplicar a la lotería de vivienda, a la cual tengo aplicando más de 4 años. Sin embargo, cuando empecé a involucrarme en las reuniones, me di cuenta que tenía que hacer más si realmente quería cambiar mi situación. Es por eso que junto con muchos líderes adultos mayores luchamos por la construcción de un edificio de Casa Adelante, 1296 Shower, así como por obtener los subsidios para 41 unidades del mismo edificio, en el cual yo no salí favorecida. Sin embargo, esto no impide que yo siga luchando por un hogar digno para todos. En octubre del 2020 salí favorecida con el número 1 en la lotería de vivienda, pero debido a mis ingresos no califiqué para vivir en dicho edificio, ya que mi renta sería de $1,000 y mis ingresos del Seguro Social son de 960. Fui a pedir subsidios y no había, me dijeron. Fue una desilusión muy grande, ya que anhelo retirarme. Yo, a pesar de mi edad y mi estado de salud, tengo que seguir trabajando porque mis ingresos no me alcanzan. Estoy cansada. Ansío un retiro tranquilo y un retiro tranquilo y digno. No sé cuándo mis fuerzas me darán, pero por eso, cuando escuché la iniciativa del impuesto a las unidades vacantes, nuevamente surgió otra vez esa luz y esperanza para no dejar de seguir luchando por obtener un subsidio que no solo me ayudará a mí, sino a muchos adultos mayores que están como yo y a generaciones futuras de adultos mayores. Por eso hoy les agradezco que hoy estén aquí conmigo, que estoy en representación de miles de adultos mayores que deseamos tener un hogar digno. Gracias.
Muchas gracias por su trabajo y para guardar sus sueños, a tener vivienda accesible. Su trabajo es una inspiración para todos, que cuando organizamos tenemos un parte en los cambios que podemos hacer, ¿no? Entonces, gracias. Faith in Action. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and showing us that our dreams that we share together are ones that hold us together. And when we organize and listen to one another and learn from our actions, we can win. Next up, we have Shanti Singh from Democratic Socialists of America. We know that DSA was really involved with Prop F, the right to counsel, in 2018, and Prop I and Prop K, social housing and public housing, authorization in 2020. How does an empty homes tax fit into DSA's political priorities and program?
Thank you, and sorry again for being late. Got Zoom brain. I just think everything is on Zoom now, and it's not. My name is Shanti Singh, she, her. I've been with the San Francisco Democratic Socialists of America for 5 years now, which basically since we started as an organization, or restarted. I think, where to start? I mean, the reason I think that we keep coming back as DSA to ballot measures that are about housing and homelessness is not just, of course, because that is the most important priority for folks in San Francisco, but also because we won't have a working class to fight for as socialists, to fight with, if we don't keep people in their homes. Especially because, right now, the truth is we are not building enough truly affordable housing. We are losing people faster than we can build housing for them. We have, I actually work down the street at the Centro del Pueblo, and we have folks there who are commuting into work from, Stockton and Tracy, and getting up at 4 a.m, spending time away from their families. So for DSA, when we say we're an organization that's buying for the working class, if we don't have a working class left in San Francisco, what is there to fight for, right? And I do think that that's a big part of why we keep coming back time and time again to housing measures, right? Our first ever ballot measure was Prop F, which we did with Supervisor Preston here, who was at the time my boss, and which was tenant right to counsel. We then, the same year, were part of the big coalition effort for Proposition C, Our City, Our Home, which was the corporate tax to fund all sorts of great things, but housing the homeless. And I think that's why, we're coming back to this now, why the empty homes tax was such a key priority for us. For DSA, I think that the ballot system is having this system, and comparing that to, other states, other DSA chapters, we really have an opportunity, and we kind of want to it's going to sound like a harsh word, but in a good way, like weaponize the fact that we do have this option, this direct democracy system, and that we can use it to not just get DSA in front of people, talk about socialism, talk about economic justice, talk about housing for all, talk about what a real city run by worker democracy would look like. We can do that in our conversations with voters, but we also get to work with amazing organizations like Faith in Action, and especially as an organization that is, I'm 5 years in, it's been 5 long years, I don't always feel like the new kid on the block anymore, but in terms of the long history of organizing and worker and tenant power in San Francisco, we are. So we do want to use these opportunities to build community with folks, and really with the left and the workers and the tenants of San Francisco. And a couple other things. I don't know how much time I have, but I'll try to keep it quick. We really do think about this ballot propositions as part of a bigger strategy. So it is a priority for our chapter. When we meet and we discussed our priorities, we said ballot measure is our priority for 2022. But it's one of many strategies, and so it's not in isolation that we want, for all of our different strategies for racial justice, for class struggle, for political liberation, for economic democracy. This is just one of them. But it is one that we think is really important because, we're lucky to live in a city that is very politically active, that does have a rich history of tenants and workers and communities of color organizing and fighting back. And so, we kind of see it as a mechanism to advance that bigger struggle, right? And it's also just a great tool to bring new people into the movement, right? I think a lot of times when people are angry and upset about all of the injustice that they see around them in the city, and they want to do something, but they don't really know where to start. And actually a ballot measure is a really nice way to get somebody started, because whatever you want to do, maybe you want to get signatures, maybe that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you just want to help out, maybe you want to set up the table, or maybe you're one of those people who wants to stand on top of a statue and fire everybody up, right? But it's a great way to bring new people into the movement, because whatever your comfort level is, however new you are, you might know everything, you might think you know nothing, there's always a place for you in that kind of a campaign. And kind of bringing it, doing that around a cause and an issue sometimes could bring more people in than bringing it around a candidate, although I will say we do candidate races. We did help elect this guy, so. So yeah, I think to kind of sum it all up, in terms of why does DSA love ballot measures about housing, it really is that we think that that's the most important issue to advance a vision of collective liberation for the working class. So I hope I answered that question adequately.
Next up is Supervisor Preston. Supervisor Preston, you come out of a tenant rights background and are the founder of Tenants Together. How does the empty homes tax fit in with tenant organizing and work around tenants' rights?
Thanks, John. And let me just start by thanking Faith in Action, Council of Community Housing Organizations for hosting this, and also DSA, and in particular DSA, Faith in Action, and all the folks who are working so hard to get signatures. And I see Pat Cochran is here, who is signature coordinator and campaign coordinator in chief right now. It's going really well, and so it's really exciting to see this campaign, this idea that you have talked about, that's been on people's minds for so long as a possible solution, to see it finally coming into being a reality. And we're going to win this in November, but we got work to do before we get there. I think it's really important that we recognize, as Shanti was saying, the importance of these ballot measures. I mean, most of the really big steps that we've made in San Francisco toward making housing a human right have been through ballot measures. And just in the last few years, looking at Prop F for a right to counsel, Prop C that was mentioned, to tax big corporations to fund solutions to homelessness, Proposition I to tax big real estate deals to fund social housing and rent relief, Proposition K to build and create 10,000 units of municipal housing, public housing in San Francisco. These are all ideas coming from voters and coming from grassroots organizations and passing at the ballot. So I'm excited by all of these wins. And it's hard for me to talk about this empty homes tax without seeing it in the context of all of those ballot wins, even while the real estate industry continues to have their wins and their profit making and their displacement of people that we are all fighting back against. To your question, John, why is the empty homes tax, why is this a tenant issue? How does this fit in with tenant organizing and stability for tenants? I would say it is really a tenant issue in three different ways. The first is pretty obvious. People who move into these empty homes when we pass this tax are overwhelmingly going to be tenants. So if people will have homes as a result of this, instead of units sitting vacant as profit-making machines, commodities, and investments. So this could generate, if Vancouver's any indication, I mean, this could generate homes for thousands of San Franciscans within a year or two. Second reason it's a big issue for groups, the Anti-Displacement Coalition, tenant rights organizations, Faith in Action, and others, is because we know that the vacancies are part of a displacement model. They are part of what drives people out of their homes. The vacancies are part of a real estate speculation in which buildings are purchased and everyone is evicted, and then the units sit vacant. So we are taking vacancy out of that equation. We are saying to that real estate speculator, go somewhere else. But you're not going to come into San Francisco, buy a building, kick everyone out, like some of the buildings in my district that have been sitting completely empty for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, that used to be full of working class folks, rent-controlled tenants here in San Francisco. So this is going to be the most powerful thing we can do as a city to stop that kind of real estate speculation in its tracks. And the third reason I think it's a tenant issue, and I want to give huge credit here to Faith in Action, is because of how we're going to use the money. So we know that the empty homes tax is going to work in some cases to incentivize owners of property to fill empty units. We know that's going to happen. But we also know some owners are going to just continue to hold it vacant. And they have the right to do that legally. But we have the right to make sure they pay for that. And this tax is going to tax them. The estimate from the budget legislative analyst was a tax similar to the Vancouver tax, which this is modeled on to some extent, could bring in an estimated $38 million a year, and it could be significantly more than that. Half of those funds will be used for rental subsidies for seniors and low-income folks. And again, this was something that there was incredible clarity from Faith in Action from the beginning around using the money that comes in from this tax for rental subsidies, particularly for seniors. So I'm thrilled that that's in the final version of this, and if voters approve it, half these revenues will go to rental subsidies. The other half of the revenue is important too. It's going to go to acquiring vacant buildings for the purpose of creating affordable housing. It will be the first and the only fund dedicated by voters in San Francisco or by anyone specifically to buy these buildings that are completely vacant or mostly vacant and create affordable housing. And that's going to house all the folks who you've been talking about, this, all the seniors, folks who are low income, and who we know the city has completely failed to build housing for. So acquisitions are an important part of the strategy of creating more affordable housing. This is going to provide an important source of funds for that. So for all those reasons, I think it's a major tenant issue. I think we're seeing unity already from all the folks who work with and organize with tenants who are solidly in support of this. At the end of the day, housing should be a human right, not a commodity, and this measure speaks to that directly. And as others have stated, this ballot measure just confronts the completely immoral situation where there are 4 homes sitting empty in this city for every one person who's on the street. Think about that. For every person on the street, there's 4 homes sitting empty. We know that that's fundamentally wrong, and I'm very excited that we're going to take a step toward changing that by passing the empty homes tax. So, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Preston. It's great to have you as an ally in this fight and struggle. So Fernando Marti, my colleague at the Council of Community Housing Organizations, has been exploring the idea of a vacancy tax since 2015. Fernando, how do vacancies impact the city's housing goals? And if you could talk about maybe the budget analyst report.
Sure. So before I talk about the budget analyst report, I wanted to maybe add a little personal note, just listening to all of you about housing and homes and the title that we gave to tonight's discussion as housing for people or for profits. So some of you may know I am currently facing an owner move-in eviction. And facing that has made me think a lot about the home I live in and have lived in for the last 24 years. And the meaning of that home as the place where I fell in love, the place where my child was born, the place where I keep an altar to my ancestors from Ecuador and from Spain, the place where we have family dinners. And that is very different from thinking about that place as a place to make profit. And what this tax does is it starts to confront that way of looking at housing units as just a place to make money. And the way that money is made out of those homes is partly through extracting what little income we have in rent. So our comrades from Faith in Action talked about the seniors who pay 70% of their income in rent. What little is left for food and anything else once you've paid 70% of your income in rent. But then there is also these places, these homes, as just investments without anything having to do with housing anyone. They are just places for the very rich to park their money because they know that in San Francisco, those homes are increasing in value by 7.5% every year, which means that every 10 years, those homes double in price. That value doubles. That's great. You can't get that in the stock market. You certainly can't get that in the bank. So as part of this process, Supervisor Preston commissioned the budget and legislative analyst of the city to look at where these vacancies are, how many there are, but not only that, to also compare that to where we are building housing. And the funny thing is that the places on the map where we see all of those vacancies increasing are the same places where we are supposedly building market rate housing. Now, that doesn't mean that none of that housing has people living in them. But many of those buildings that you see downtown, which are supposedly housing, are at least 1/3 empty. And I know folks who live in the below market rate units, the affordable units in some of those buildings, and they talk about how there's nobody living anywhere else except for those BMR units. They are in basically empty buildings except for that 20% of the units that might be affordable. That's not just an outrage when, as Supervisor Preston said, we have 10,000 people homeless without homes and we have 40,000 vacant units. But as organizers who want to see more housing built, it lays bare what is actually happening in that market of buildings that are supposedly housing, that are really just investment properties. Out of those 40,000 vacant units, probably about 10,000 are what are called vacant, seasonal vacant, I think is the term. Those are not the units that are vacant because somebody passed away and nobody has moved in. They're not the units that are in between renting or a unit that is somebody moved out and it's for sale. Those are the units that are kept year after year empty. So I mentioned that I am facing an owner move-in eviction. I live in Noe Valley. Strangely enough, besides that downtown area, there's a few little pockets that pop up as vacancies. Cow Hollow, Dog Patch, Noe Valley. I think it's the places where people like to Airbnb. But down the street from me, as I'm facing an eviction, is a building that for those 24 years that I have lived on that street is a 2-unit building, has been vacant that entire time. And according to my neighbor, when they had talked to the business that rents on the ground floor, it was probably vacant at least 10 years before that. When there are people on our street who are looking for housing. And that is what we hope and why our organization, the Council of Community Housing Organizations, is fully in support of getting this on the ballot and passing it and freeing up the 6,000 to 10,000 units that are likely to be freed up and putting whoever continues to keep those units vacant, have them pay to house people by buying buildings, taking them off the market, and providing rental subsidies.
So wanted to open up for questions, but we have a couple questions still that I think are important to hear from Faith in Action leaders, as well as Shanti from DSA, is what is your experience in getting signatures on the petitions? What are you learning from that process? What is the effective way to communicate with people, to sign? What are you learning from this work? And how do you see your organization getting stronger? Who would be the one to speak on this? Violeta, Brenda, okay.
Buenas tardes a todos. Mire, yo llegué aquí a San Francisco hace 23 años y me estoy tan desilusionada ahora porque, como dicen, por falta de vivienda hay tanta gente en la calle que San Francisco está tan sucio que ya mucha gente no quiere venir aquí a San Francisco. Cuando antes era una parte muy turística, y venía, y ahora donde quiera encuentran una basura o una persona tirada o ¿por qué? Porque no tienen dónde vivir. Entonces, eso es una de las cosas que me da una pena ver cuando San Francisco tiene dinero para eso y para más. Pero no sé si será por el alcalde, por quien sea, pero no hace nada. Simplemente vayan a la misión, a caminar aquí en la misión y ven cómo está de sucio todo. Entonces, eso es lo que deberíamos de comenzar en ver cómo limpiar San Francisco. Al menos ese es mi punto de vista.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Violeta, soy organizadora comunitaria con Fe en Acción. Como los líderes han dicho, ¿verdad? Este sueño del 30% o este subsidio es algo que ellos vienen viendo desde hace mucho tiempo. Y con la recaudación de firmas, pues desde que ellos vieron esto, antes de que saliera la noticia, hablábamos no tan públicamente, pero con los líderes que tenemos más cercanos. Y cuando ya se habló públicamente, nosotros empezamos a hablar con nuestras comunidades, con nuestros sacerdotes. Hemos estado haciendo muchísimos foros de vivienda donde presentamos el ideal que la ciudad pinta de la vivienda accesible con lo real que la gente está viviendo. Y les decimos también las unidades vacantes que hay. El domingo estuvimos en la Catedral de Santa María de la Asunción, hubo más o menos como 300 personas y todas se quedaron impactadas de saber que hay 41,000 unidades vacantes. Recaudamos firmas, mucha gente se unió para que los mantuviéramos informados, cómo podían apoyar. Nosotros estamos planeando tener reuniones de investigación con nuestros supervisores, ya que los líderes son de los diferentes 11 distritos y la gente se apuntó también para estar presente. Entonces, ya llevamos como 6, 7 foros y gracias a Dios han sido más de 300 personas en todos esos foros y por ejemplo, las líderes hablan constantemente con la comunidad en 2 meses más o menos. Y eso fue con respecto a Plaza 16, hablaron con casi 4,000 personas y ellas están planeando hablar, porque muchas de ellas son ciudadanas, hablar para pedirles el apoyo, hablarles de lo que está pasando, de las unidades que hay y decirles la realidad y crearles conciencia, ¿verdad? Entonces, si ellas quieren, vamos a formar equipos, porque muchas son mayores, ir a tomar las firmas directamente a sus hogares para que ellas no tengan que salir. Y también han recaudado firmas después de las misas. Por ejemplo, Sonia ha recaudado firmas en las calles, en las líneas de comida. A veces traen su desta, donde quieran. Ellas no paran, porque como ellas dijeron, para ellas es un sueño. Oscar también. Todas aquí han participado bastante y hemos tenido la experiencia, al menos eso, de que cuando decimos 41,000 unidades vacantes, la gente no puede creer cómo puede ser posible eso. Y cuando damos lo que hemos investigado, 10,000 personas en la calle, 5,000 adultos, hacen cuentas y dicen, no, esto es incorrecto. Y más cuando les decimos que suben de valor y desafortunadamente están desplazando a nuestra comunidad. De hecho, yo Mi hija por 6 meses estuvo buscando casa en San Francisco y se tuvo que mudar fuera de San Francisco. Trabaja aquí como maestra, viene todos los días, pero ella no se pudo quedar a vivir en San Francisco porque es imposible, las rentas están carísimas. Entonces, yo a veces me pregunto realmente qué significa la palabra santuario, porque no solo se trata de migración, sino se trata de respetar la dignidad de todo ser humano y que viva con equidad en esta ciudad. Gracias.
Gracias. So the same question is for Shanti. What is DSA, finding and doing this work of reaching out to residents to sign the petition?
Before I say anything, I have to give a little shout out because I was just, as Violeta was reminding me, that was my first, before there even was a DSA San Francisco, I think my first action that I really got involved in or tried to support was with Faith in Action. It was with Plaza 16 Coalition and the Monster and the Mission. So that was like the first real fight that brought me into the movement in San Francisco. So I'm very grateful for that. In terms of, it's funny, I was just thinking, Pat Cochran, our wonderful campaign genius, strategist, everything. I was going to say maybe he's more qualified to answer this question than I am, but I'll take a stab at it. It's been great. I mean, this is going to sound like a kind of basic observation, but COVID has been really also just hard for, to maintain community with people. If you are one of the people, not everybody is, but if you are one of the people who has the privilege to stay inside, right? And the whole problem is not enough people do. But even then, it's been really an isolating 2 years. So what I've really seen, we have a mobilization, at least one every weekend, every Saturday, sometimes on Sunday. But what I've really seen is just like so much joy and relief and enthusiasm about being together again, about being in community again, about talking to strangers again. That, I don't want to jinx it or put a curse on it, but I do believe we are kind of ahead of where we thought we were going to be at this stage, which is awesome. And I think that's in no small part because there's so much enthusiasm. Like people are really ready to go. And I mean, we have amazing volunteers. We have tried to make it a little fun. We have a contest where people can win a hat, I think. But, and I'll say for DSA too, it's like I think when people think about a socialist organization, they think we're all gonna show up with Karl Marx pamphlets and shove them in people's faces, and that's not what it's about. But this vacancy tax, the conversations that our volunteers and our members and everybody who shows up to the mobilizations, the conversations that I've had are also really great with folks because, we were talking about it's an obvious issue, right? In terms of people see people on the streets and they can see, that's what you were talking about, the injustice of having, 4 empty homes for every person who's on the street. But also people really see vacancies. I mean, I see them. I'm a renter in District 3. It's wild. When I was talking to my neighbors to sign this petition, I just had to point behind me. Look at the building behind us. There's 3 vacant units that have been vacant all through COVID, and the stickers are still on the windows of an old building, right? And they're stacked on top of each other. Right? There were so many vacancies in my neighborhood, and at the same time, the older tenants in my building, I live in a rent-controlled building, we're also scared. Is Veritas going to come and buy our building? I think about that. We think about that every day, right? Especially my neighbors who've been in that building, raised their kids there, been living there for 40 or 50 years. So I think, but even people on the street, I think the injustice is obvious to them, and people have stories. They see vacant homes everywhere. So that part is almost kind of easy because people are already mad about it. And I think we found that with our mobilizations. And I think that's why we're doing pretty well on gathering signatures because it is people have just had it. They're so frustrated with this issue. But yeah, it's just, like I said, it's been really exciting to get out there and talk to people. I think people want to be talked to. I think people want to talk after 2 years of this and counting. And the last thing I'll say that kind of makes me feel very positive about this campaign So I work at Tenants Together. That's my day job. So I work at the organization that Supervisor Preston founded. And some of us, we went down to help another campaign in Pasadena where they're trying to put rent control on the ballot. And it's going to be on the ballot. They made their goal right in time, which is really awesome. Now I have to win it, but I was out there and it was great. We had people from tenant organizers from all over. So I finally got to meet a friend I've been working with forever, but never met her. She drove from Oxnard all the way, and people drove from Santa Barbara. Everybody drove to Pasadena to support them in their final signature push. And when I thought I was pretty good at getting signatures. I did horribly. I got one all day. And the reason was I was out there knocking doors. They were knocking doors. They were to signature gather. Everybody I talked to, every tenant, was already signed it, so excited to vote for it. I'm so pumped. It's going to be amazing. How's it going? Are you guys, close to your goal? Are you going to make it? You think it's going to be okay? They already knew about it. And I'm not familiar with Pasadena. They had just dropped me in a random part of Pasadena, basically. And I'm just knocking on these doors. And there was so much enthusiasm already, and that's always a really good sign that because it's not just you get your signatures, you get your goal, but then you have to actually win the thing. And I kind of see the same level of enthusiasm here. And I hope we can kind of have that Pasadena standard, which by the time we get all of these signatures and we're done and we turn them in, that all these folks are already all right, let's go. When do I get to vote for this? And so I am seeing that kind of enthusiasm here, and that's really great. So.
Yeah, it's really great to see the enthusiasm, and it's coming from the experience of not being able to have affordable housing, not being able to paying so much of your income for housing, and then hearing that there's housing that's available that's not being used. It just agitates, right? It makes you want to do something about it because you have a vacuum that has to be filled. And so it's really great to see this enthusiasm. What I've seen in the past many years in San Francisco is that, and we've all talked about it, is that the people, residents, have actually identified ways to bring new resources to create affordable housing. We had the Prop C for supportive housing. We had a gross receipts tax that was for another version of housing. We had a real estate transfer tax that was actually passed. All of these came from communities that were seeking resources to be able to build affordable housing and to build supportive housing and make sure there are housing subsidies. And when the communities come together and identify these sources, we also have the problem of City Hall not acting upon them. So this is a question for Supervisor Preston. What are the ramifications, the political ramifications of winning this tax? Because I believe we'll win this empty homes tax. What does that mean in context of all the other things that we have won, and what has to change at City Hall for us to actually get to the next level of ensuring that our workers and working people can be housed in San Francisco?
Thanks for the question. So one of the big decisions on this tax was whether to make it what's called a general tax or a special tax. A general tax, the money just goes into the general fund of the city, and there's a fight every year on how to use the money. A special tax is dedicated for a specific purpose. And we chose to, after consultation with community organizations, we really recommended that it be a special tax. It wasn't our call in the end. It was community and the proponents of the measure. But we felt that we have to make sure that City Hall uses the money the way the voters intend. So there's a bit of a dance and a lot of conflict on some of the prior ballot measures. And you all know this, have been part of everyone here I think has been part of the budget process. where we've tried to fight to make sure that some of these other tax revenues, like Prop I, actually go to the purposes that voters wanted them to go for. But in this tax measure, I think all of the folks who've been working on it, who've been engaged in the research, the organizing, who are ready to go get signatures, felt like we can't leave it up to politicians, any of us, to decide where this money goes. We want to have it dedicated specifically. So if this passes in November, it's got to qualify and pass. That money is set aside only for the purposes I described before, for the rent subsidies and for acquiring vacant buildings. But this is only one stream of revenue, right? This, if it passes, will be tens of millions of dollars. We don't know if it'll be 10, 20 million, 50, 60 million. Like I said, the best guess is about 38 million. We have a lot of other affordable housing revenue that comes in from things that the voters have passed previously, right? And one of the challenges as a supervisor that's trying to get affordable housing prioritized instead of just all this market rate housing all the time is that in our city, we have a very strong mayor system where all of the decisions, or most of the decisions, around spending in the city are made by the mayor's office. And one of our challenges is always trying to figure out how are they deciding what to fund and what not to fund. And so often, pet projects of the mayor and of the administration get funded, but priorities of the community don't get funded. And that is something that is a structural problem in San Francisco, and it is because we have really no accountability in the current system, particularly for the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, which is the main department of the city that decides what affordable housing gets funded, what gets built, and one of the things that we have been doing, I'm the chair of the Government Audit and Oversight Committee. One of the things we've been trying to do is exercise some oversight over the Mayor's Office of Housing and why they fund certain things and not other things. We asked for an audit of them. We get to audit 2 departments a year. We are in the process right now of auditing their department and hope to have more answers later this summer. But at the end of the day, right now, the Mayor's Office of Housing is only accountable to the mayor, really, unlike other big departments that are accountable to a commission or some other entity. So we exercise some oversight where we can, but right now the decisions around how the money gets spent are from the mayor. And I think structurally we need to change that and actually have the Mayor's Office of Housing have more transparency and also have oversight from a commission. Because there is considerable money, and yet we're not spending as much as we could. We're not building as much as we could. And there just are things that you see, and former Supervisor Avalos has seen this, I'm sure, for years. It's amazing how certain things get funded at times when they are politically, it makes sense for an ally of the mayor or a particular purpose from the mayor, not just this mayor, prior mayors. And that's no way to make decisions. We have communities that need affordable housing. We have constituents, seniors, families with children who need housing, and we need to be really much more transparent as a city of how we're deciding what we're going to fund and what not to fund. And it's, we face this all the time in this city. Even decisions on things that are good, that I think we all agree are good, using, let's say, state money from the Project Home Key program to buy hotels. There's lots of hotels. I'm the chair of an oversight committee on the Board of Supervisors. I can't tell you how the administration decided to buy that hotel and not that hotel. Even though we ask over and over, what are the criteria? How can the community weigh in? and decide these things. And I think it's really a problem. I will just say this one last thing. In my limited experience, 2 years in City Hall, it is very clear to me that on most of the issues facing the city, the community has solutions. And has the wisdom, and often it is the lack of transparency and the backroom decision-making of City Hall that puts us in a situation where we don't solve problems that we could solve. So some things we have to go to the ballot, right? To tax someone in San Francisco and in California, you got to go to the ballot, right? We have to do that, right? We can't just do that in City Hall. But the spending decisions, the budget decisions, we have a system that invests an incredible amount of power in the mayor, and we have the departments that are responsible for allocating those funds for the housing that people need, doing a lot of work behind the scenes without really disclosing to the community how they're making decisions, and without the structures in place to make sure there's transparency and accountability. So whether it's this ballot management this year in November or future ballots, we also have to tackle not just the issue of vacancies, but the bigger issue of how are decisions made around the affordable housing funds that we have. Because what we're doing right now is not working, right? We are producing less than half of our affordable housing goals, and we are producing 150% of our market rate housing goals that most working class people can't afford. So that's our challenge, but it's clear that what we're doing is doing some good, right? We're certainly creating some affordable housing, but nowhere near the need. And I think the biggest cause of that is actually lack of transparency and lack of oversight of the folks under the mayor's control who are making these decisions in City Hall.
And on that note, I want to really lift up, what we're able to achieve with this measure is real collaborative leadership. Faith in action, your model of, taking your experience on the street, your experience in the homes, and turning into a policy to fight for. DSA looking at the worker experience and making sure that workers can have a voice in what our government does and how our society is shaped. And then bringing this to City Hall to actually see that we can actually move a measure through the Department of Elections and on the streets to actually, achieve part of our aspirations. It's this kind of collaborative leadership that's actually going to change, how we can make this city work for us. And so whatever happens with this campaign, we're going to win this one. It helps us to build for the next one. And if the next one is another time of getting more revenue and resources to build housing, we still have to make sure that City Hall is going to practice the collaborative relationship with the public so the public's voice can be part of the solution-making process. That's something to tie us all together. I think that the way the politics work in San Francisco is that they would like to turn the fire on all of us and have us turn the fire back on them. Actually, the best way to fight fire is not with fire, but with water. And the best way to fight against efforts to divide and conquer us is through solidarity and collaborative leadership. So that's what we're able to see happening here in this room, but all over the city. And when we actually fight and we win, this city will be more working for us. So it's been really inspiring to be here with all of you. And I'd love to hear, before we close out, where can we find and how can people plug into the signature efforts around the city? Perhaps Faith in Action can let us know where you're going to be and how people can help you if you're on the streets on the weekends or in the evenings, how people can plug in, as well as from DSA. Who would be best to say that from Faith in Action?
Más So, yeah, Pat, him, having a mobilization this Saturday at noon in DeBoche Park, right at DeBoche and Steiner. That will be at noon. And then the following weekend on Sunday the 22nd, we're actually going to be having a mobilization, then barbecue in Golden Gate Park. So come on down if you want to help get signatures and you want to get a burger or hot dog or whatever they eat afterwards, and we can make that happen. But yeah, come grab me after the meeting if you want a petition.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a lovely evening to share with you. Thank you for all of your great work in organizing and helping to move San Francisco forward. And I look forward to throwing down with you all. Good night.